going to echo if you're.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Mike Rosato. This is DevOps Live, and I just want to make a few announcements tonight. I just want to let everyone know that in August we're going to have DevOps Days Dallas, and we already started selling early bird tickets, and also the CFP is open. So tonight we're joined by Peter Hack from Harness.io and from
Bennett Farley.
Bennett Farley.
There you go. There you go.
Both from Harness.io. And they're going to be talking about Verified GitOps beyond GitSync. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it with them, and we'll go ahead and listen to the presentation they have for tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Like you said, again, I think I've introduced myself to most of you, but my name is Bennett Farley. This is Peter Hack. We're from Harness. Very technical portion, so I make sure to bring Peter so y'all don't have to listen to me talk. And so I'm not going to present any slides, but just to give you a little background about the company before we jump into the tonight's conversation. The company was founded maybe 2 or 3 years ago, right? We've only been selling the tool for 8 quarters. I'm not sure if y'all heard of the APM tool, App Dynamics, but the founder, Jody Bansal, sold that company to Cisco, founded this company, Harness, with his old roommate from Stanford, Rishi, and that we really try to do one thing, right? We want to do the opposite of what Mark Zuckerberg says. You know, Mark Zuckerberg's good tagline is move fast and break things. We don't want to do that. You know, we still want you guys to move really fast, but we don't want to break things. And so we are an automated continuous delivery as a service platform. We'll be talking today about Verified GitOps beyond GitSync, but I just wanted to provide that little bit of background so you get an idea of what this topic's going to be about. But I promise it'll be not too Harness related and more applicable to everyday life inside of the GitOps community. All right. So
excellent. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Bennett. So hello, everyone. So my name is Peter Hack. I'm a solutions architect at Harness. And this presentation was actually supposed to be presented by my colleague, Bryan, but he had an emergency situation where he couldn't be here tonight. So you get me, which is great because actually I really like this topic and it's something that be fun to talk about. This is really a conversation. So if you have questions along the way, or we want to talk a little bit about some of the context here, please feel free to jump in. I don't want this to be me preaching to you because I'm not really good at preaching. So anyway, we're going to talk about this Verified GitOps, and let's see where we go with this. There we go. Sorry, I'm in the wrong screen there. Perfect. All right. So how many of you today are using Git as your source control repos? Pretty much the majority of the room. I mean, probably some of you have been using SVN or other types of source control, but ultimately the concept of GitOps is really the idea of using Git together with an operations workflow, right? So how many of you are using GitOps, in the idea of GitOps? Are you deploying in GitOps manner? No? Yeah, a couple of, yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I can imagine, but I'll try and go through some of the ones that I can think of. But really this is what GitOps is about. It's about basically taking your configurations, taking your application code and your deployment code, all of that as code, right? All infrastructure, everything is code, and making it declarative so that you can version everything and be able to work through a workflow of that context as code, right? So really keeping everything as code, versioned together, and being able to use that to deploy changes, right, to your environment in an automatic way. So there's some benefits to this, right? You can use developer native tooling, right? Git is a good example of this. We can, all developers are pretty familiar with Git or other source control tools. And by using the tools that you understand and that are also cloud native as well, not only developer native, but cloud native, you can utilize these workflows in very modern technologies. But also because of the way Git is contrived, you could actually go back and use it with some of your legacy applications as well. So GitOps really allows you this developer native tooling sets. It allows you automatic recovery because if you have all of your code, your infrastructure configurations in your application code in code and stored in in source control, then of course at any moment using GitOps and the automated workflows built into that model, you should be able to just recover back to a current state. Or if, for instance, everything goes down, you should be able to just recover back to that state with all of the configurations that you had ahead of time. Granted, things like backups of databases are a little bit different. So, concurrency, that's a different topic. But for the purposes of the GitOps workflow, automated recovery is great. You also have credential management, which is nice because if you're using Git, then you can utilize the authentication tools within Git to basically, and especially with GitOps, since all the work is done at the GitOps level or at the Git level, you're utilizing all of the authentication tools that are there, right? So you're using the authorization and authentication tools of Git to determine who can deploy make changes in Git, which is actually, those changes are automatically posted to all of your existing workflows, your infrastructure, et cetera. And also with versioning and Git blame, you can actually see who's doing what and be able to move back and forth between versions, which is a really nice part about GitOps as well. And finally, because it's fairly familiar to everybody, it's easy to transfer. Most developers have some familiarity with Git or with the GitOps workflows. So you should be able to very easily, as a new developer comes in, onboarding them, GitOps is a great option here, right? Because it shouldn't be that hard to learn. They should be pretty up to speed. At least any developer in the room that, worth their salt should have some Git experience. But from a room perspective, like everybody here for the most part is using Git or has some familiarity with Git. So I assume you all agree? Yes, no, maybe? Yeah, there's a lot of nods. Okay, all right. So here's some of the drawbacks. How many of you get to the point, this is XKCD is fantastic, but how many of you get to the point where your commit comments are just like, yeah, I did it, or this was done, and you don't get a lot of information out of them. And this is a challenge because as you get more and more familiar with your code, a lot of times you tend to get more and more lax with your commit messaging. So you have this concept of auto deployment. Well, that's a kind of a challenge here, right? Because it's one of the great things about Git is you can do kind of webhooks and triggers, right? I commit my code or I do a pull, then all of those pulls should immediately move out to production or to my next, to my next stage of my environment. The challenge, of course, with this is, well, not everything, it should go out to that level, right? You have no real control. There's no policies built around it. It's just you commit, it goes to the next, goes public. It triggers the workflow. There's also some limited functionality here. The tools that you use for GitOps today, you're either using Git directly or GitLab or some of the other tools that are out there. There's really no way to customize in real time your Helm or using Kustomize or Kubernetes specs like in real time as you're making, you make the change, but there's no way to templatize or utilize any of the specs of those tools because it's automatically deployed and they're not necessarily built into the Git workflow. And we'll talk about that in a little while. The other problem, of course, is tribal knowledge. So as you build out a more complex Git workflow, you tend to find that those processes become more tribal internally. So transferring that knowledge becomes a little bit of a challenge, even though the data is there and the information is that should be, the configurations, everything should be in your GitOps workflow. It's, most engineering orgs kind of have this alienation there. They just don't understand all the underlying technologies around it. So you wind up with a little bit of a challenge in sharing the knowledge across teams. Each team kind of silos their specific Git workflow, and it can become very challenging as an organization to really coalesce all that knowledge. And finally, there's a limit to the technology support as well. So a lot of companies advertise themselves as a GitOps tool per se, but in the end, really, GitOps workflows only support, at least natively, only support Kubernetes. So if you're in an organization that's not utilizing Kubernetes, or you're using even things like, modern tools like Lambda, you're doing serverless configurations, or maybe you're more legacy, you have a .NET shop and you're doing stuff, back in, thick clients or whatever, right? You don't have a lot of the functionality in a GitOps flow to be able to utilize that natively. You have to build the scripts around making that work. And that's kind of a bigger challenge. So let's kind of look at this. So the pieces of this puzzle, right? We have this GitOps workflow. What does that actually look like? What does the GitOps workflow look like? Well, you have all of these different components. You have your source control, you have the artifacts themselves, the registries where those are stored. You may have some change management in there, some content management. You have monitoring APM tools. I don't know how many of you use those. There's your release strategies, there's reporting that you need to have. So all of these things are the pieces you need to really, truly have a solid workflow, right? What we talk about, kind of what this topic is about. These are all the things that are in your environment. But native to GitOps, you only have a handful of those, right? Authorization, environments, platform, source control, and your release strategies, right? These are the only things that GitOps natively has. So everything else you have to build, or you have to find alternate tools that you can, kludge in or integrate into your tool sets. How many folks here today have kind of realized some of this or explored any of this? Anyone in the room? One, two. Do you have any comments on any of this? Does anything kind of resonate with some of the pain you felt trying to do a GitOps workflow? Have any of you actually tried to do it?
We have a PowerShell script that started out as a script to integrate our issue tracking with our Git workflows that has turned into a 1,000-line monster that nobody wants to touch because it doesn't have any unit tests. And if you touch something, something will break, and things got globbed on and on and on to it. So now it's this thing that nobody wants to touch it for. So
I feel your pain. How many of you guys use Jenkins today? How many of you have a Jenkins file that's less than 1,000 lines? How many of you have a Jenkins file that's less than 1,000 lines and covers all of your applications, right? That's kind of the challenge, right? You can have a Jenkins file, you could have, in your case, a PowerShell script or scripts as a whole, but in the end, you have to have one of those for every one of your applications. And I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit in a second. So let's talk about the topic of the story. So I showed you GitOps, right? This is what GitOps is. This is the challenges that we're all seeing and the drawbacks that we're seeing in GitOps. But what's verified GitOps? Like, what are we trying to say here in this idea of verified GitOps? Now, you may, this is ideology, right? In the end, everybody has their kind of own idea of how this should all work, how this should all flow. And this verified GitOps is actually my colleague Bryan Feuling's idea of how it should be, right? Like how it conceptually should be.
A very basic question. So what is GitOps as a term itself? So you're talking about Jenkins, you're talking about artifacts, you're talking about deployments. Is that everything included?
So so if we drop back here, we'll drop back a slide or two. So what GitOps is taking your Git repositories and storing in your Git repositories, whether it be a mono repo or being multiple repos, your application code or your application deployment code, right? Your configuration code for that application, for the different stages that it might be in, your infrastructure you want to store as code, because the whole idea is at any moment you should be able to, if let's say AWS goes down. Now we'd all have bigger problems if AWS went down, but let's say AWS goes down tomorrow, and you need to take all of your code and you need to put it on GCP, right? Because AWS doesn't exist anymore for some reason. Aside from the fact that the world would be over at this point, but let's just say that happens. You need to be able to take all of that GitOps, using GitOps, you should be able to just hit a button and everything should be able to essentially deploy out there in GCP, right? That's the dream. And it's the dream, it's the theory. in theory, that's what should happen. In reality, that doesn't happen, mainly because GitOps is missing too many things for it to actually work. So you have to kludge it all together. And because your infrastructure is very tied to the design that you built for AWS, it won't very easily translate over to GCP, right? So because they're different APIs, they're different configurations. That should all be abstracted at some point, but it's not, right? GitOps doesn't abstract that for you today. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
So I'd just like to know how does it differ from the RPA, this kind of actions, because the RPA too, they say they would do all those automations with the works, which could be tracked and it could be loaded, and all those even inclusive testing, all those could have.
I'm sorry, but who?
Right?
Difference from who? From
GitOps, how does it differ? The RPA differs.
Robotic process automation.
From robotic process automation. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. I don't know. I don't really have the answer on that, other than your process automation. In the end, if you're using process automation, you have to build. Somebody has to build that, right? So you can do with GitOps. You can build all this. I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm just saying that it's not native, right? So yes, and who's to say that RPA wouldn't use Git as its repos for some of the content anyway, right? So you could combine RPA together with the workflows and build this out, of course, right? That's kind of the concepts of the talk is really what we're about to get into, which is kind of the advances you could put on top of GitOps, and that's actually what I'm going to touch on now. Sorry, no problem. Dan, do you have a question? You were like, okay, great. All right, so what is verified GitOps? So this is where we're talking about the idea of harmonizing those tool sets, all the different components that you saw on the previous slide, to make the relationships work and to allow your Git repo that's stored there to actually achieve the dream, whether it be through an RPA model or through some other model. Obviously, I work for Harness. This is something that we are kind of achieving, but that's not kind of the point. The point is that we're solving a problem because that problem exists, and here's the nature of that problem and kind of the way that you need to work around that. The way you need to work around the fact that there's so many different pieces of this puzzle, and you need to harmonize all that together somehow, right? So if you want to go off and build it, that's great. These are the things I'm hoping that you're going to take away from this. These are the things you need to know to do that.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like a little bit earlier, he was talking about in the deck about how different teams, I think actually you and I were talking a little bit earlier about how different teams do different processes, right? So maybe my team does this, my team does Z, this team does Y, but when we add a new service, what happens, right? It's about the standardization of the process and kind of the culture around that inside Verified GitOps. I just wanted to add
absolutely. No, absolutely. So that's a good point. And right now I'm talking in a very monolithic mindset here of like, I want to do this as a single org with a single content management system with a single set of applications that I'm working on. But in reality, in the enterprise, you've got thousands of applications and hundreds of teams working across millions of lines of code and tons of different whether it be cloud, legacy, multi-cloud in many cases, geographically disparate infrastructure. It becomes incredibly challenging because at some point now you're writing scripts to cover every one of those pieces, or you're writing RPA to do it, right? And that's a challenge.
We're spending dollars on people instead of innovating the product itself. Dollars are being spent on hiring, specific engineer types to just write these scripts, right? And so these companies are investing just tons of money into the scripts investment, when in fact we should be trying to advance the product itself. And that's what I talk to engineers all the time, and they're like, "Man, I'm just sitting here doing scripts." When in fact, they were hired to start working on the product, and this just kind of took over because it has a mind of its own.
So just a poll of the room: how many of you would consider yourselves DevOps engineers?
That's a loaded question.
Of course it's a loaded question. That was the point. But I mean, I guess my point is, how many of you are application developers that are working in organizations doing more DevOps-ly kind of deployment stuff rather than actually creating and developing value for the organization, right? And that's kind of that's the point that Bennett's making. Like, none of you actually, well, maybe so most of you probably didn't join an organization going, yeah, I just want to build infrastructure as code and deployment scripts and work in Jenkins. Like, nobody becomes a developer to work in Jenkins, right? That's not why you go and get your, your CS degree. It's just, you want to build stuff. You want to be part of like something exciting and build some value. And companies don't hire you for that reason either, right? They do now because they need it, but they really want you to derive value for an organization. And that's because, you cost the money. You need to make the money. That's kind of the idea. So let's talk about the benefits of Verified GitOps and kind of actually let's drop back and just kind of review this real quick again. So, because we did go off on a tangent. So harmonizing all of the tool sets together, right? And the standardized tooling and the processes around that, right? To make all of this work as a nice flow of that code you've stored in Git, right? So it's really a way to coalesce all the GitOps promises into something. So this is what we're calling Verified GitOps. So the benefits of this, of course, are, well, you can designate verification. So one of the challenges, of course, today in GitOps is there's really no verification step. You check it in and it goes, right? If you want to build a pause step and pause and go do something, then you have to write code, scripts or otherwise, and incorporate that somehow into your GitOps configuration to go and test all of that code and make sure things are working the way they're supposed to before it goes to the next stage. But if you commit code and it just gets merged into the branch and off it goes into the into the code base and live, well, that's not really going to work, especially if you have multi-stages, right? If you have multiple stages, you have to build even more around that. So really, like things like health checks and AP. If you think in terms of Kubernetes, like Kubernetes does a lot of this for you. It already has. If you have health checks in your code, Kubernetes is really clever about saying, oh, well, that's that doesn't work. I'm just going to restart it until it does. Does that ever work? It doesn't really work. But what happens is then you can, if you're using something like Flux or whatever, you can always go and revert to the previous version, right? But you have to do that. It's a manual step. There's no real rollback built into the GitOps model. So these are the verifications, an important part of that. Also the approvals, right? Approvals is another step that you have to build into your GitOps flow. Somehow you can't create pauses directly. You'll have to code that. So somehow you're going to have to get these approvals into your code base. And so the idea of Verified GitOps is there must be a way to get approvals in. And so how would you do that? You could script it, right? You can build in pauses and build in approval steps like connecting to Jira and otherwise. And there's a number of tools out there that are trying to solve this problem. Harness, of course, obviously is trying to solve that as well and has solutions for that. You have change management, right? So if you're going to do things like, similar to approval, if you want to provide change management as far as like notifications into your CMS system, or if you have for content management, or if you have to get approvals through an organization in Jira, you could utilize your Jira system if you have a way to connect to it and ask it, hey, approve this change before it goes into the next stage, production or otherwise, right?
Or even more so, you have to get audited externally, right? And now you have auditors looking at all your deployments and things that made changes in production. Who does that?
But the governance of that, right?
Yeah.
So how do you govern all those changes as they go? They have to be somewhere. Change management's a great place to store that.
A lot of you here, I think, work in organizations where you have to have that information, right? I saw a few B of A guys or Toyota or whatever it may be. You're going to have that when it's in production as well.
For sure. And then, of course, the most important thing, right? You got to test it. And I'm not talking about unit tests. Unit tests are pretty straightforward. You can do those on your desktop with your own local Git and your own little kube. But when you start getting into like APM testing, performance testing, security testing, PEM testing, all those pieces of your configuration, they have to happen before you go to production. If you wait till you go to production to do them, it's too late, right? Once your code is public and customers are impacted by that, that's no good. So the idea is at some stage in your workflow, you want to be able to do that with a testing strategy. And when things aren't good, when things do not make it to, do not meet those testing capabilities, how do you revert back, right? What are your failure strategies? Are you going to roll back? Are you going to roll forward? Are you going to, pause and bring in a team and notification steps and, all of the steps involved in those failure strategies? These are really kind of critical to a production level workflow. And these are things that need to be involved in a verified GitOps model, right? These are why we're kind of pushing it in that way. Now, it's not all roses. Or candy. It's there are drawbacks to the verified GitOps model. Things that you need to consider, essentially considerations. First of all, because of the way GitOps is built, there's limited integration points, and it can be problematic because a lot of the things that we're talking about, GitOps is about automation. RPA is about automation. But if you're adding a lot of these, hey, you need a manual approval, or you need to move it from one stage to the other in a manual step of a click, even a click, one single click is not an automated process. That single click makes it a manual step. So now, how do you, keep your integration? How do you manage those integration points so that you don't have to break your automation to, and of course, decrease your velocity. How many of you guys are aware of the Dora book, the Accelerate? Any of you read Accelerate? So Accelerate, yeah.
Jez Humble, the author.
Jez Humble created this story, this book.
Yep.
And Gene Kim also. So Gene Kim was who wrote the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project, and Jez Humble, who basically wrote the DevOps Bible. They have a book out called Accelerate. It's Dora, which was I always forget what Dora means, but Dora is the organization that research on automation group. So they created they did a study, and the study for Accelerate basically established that there's 4 leading indicators to organizations that are going fast, right? That are able to accelerate. And the measurements from a DevOps standpoint, and actually the SRE handbook for Google actually emphasizes these 4 measurements too. But it's basically like what's the lead time to getting your code to production, right? What's the lead time of commit on? What is the commit to customer? What is the mean time to resolution when there's a problem? What does your change failure rate look like? How do you measure how often things fail? Right. So these are really and the last one. So it's your change failure rate, your lead time, your MTTR, and the last one always kills me. But in any case, it's a great book. Accelerate's a really important book. I think you should read if you're kind of involved in this space, in the DevOps space, because it really does talk about things like keeping your accelerating your application code. And it talks a lot about organizationally how to do that, but we're talking now about technology-wise, like implementation of the technology. How do you do it? So when we talk about limited integration points, we're really talking about those processes, right? The GitOps processes, and removing those manual steps because you want to keep accelerating your code deployments. There's really just not a lot of tooling out there to do what we're talking about today, right? There's just little tooling. You can script it. You could write PowerShell scripts. You can extend a lot of the CI tools to create workflows. You can build you can use workflow engines. But the idea ultimately is that there's really only, that I know of today, one tool that kind of has answered a lot of these questions. Granted, the presentation is a little bit loaded to this, but this is what
that's special too, right? They pay us.
Yeah, they pay us, but that's why they pay us to do this. But
yeah.
But I mean, that's
other than that.
Yeah, but ultimately that's it. Harness is trying to solve this problem, and we've established that these are a lot of the problems that exist in organizations and how to solve them, and we kind of have our opinionated way of doing it, and that's kind of what Harness is trying to solve. So there's very few verified GitOps tools out there. Harness is one of them out there that can solve this problem as well. So let's think about this in practice. Approach 1 talked about a little bit, which is these 1,000-line code deployments, monorepos or otherwise, where you have just this massive, long document, a single document of all of your infrastructure, application, execution code to make this work. Now, it's actually not a bad thing that you have this one long document, because very quickly somebody could read through and see all the steps that are happening, right? Without having to go anywhere else. It's all in one document. So I know what's happening, who's doing it, what the authorizations are, what's all the pieces of the puzzle are in this one long document. But let's be honest, that's a long document, as we talked about before, thousands of lines in many cases. And the other challenge with that 1,000 lines of code is it's per application, right? It's going to be very specialized in this case, right? So that's this is one workflow. Now I need another document for the other workflow. So that probably isn't the right way to go, but it can be done. It's one approach. The other approach is essentially following the object-oriented model, right? Like a single file for each component that you're trying to manage. And so you could like deploy out your infrastructure configuration, your infrastructure code, so you can reuse that. I can use this infrastructure for anything I need that infrastructure on, or I can use my, my template for my application, reuse that for each stage, because it's just the application part. It's not the configuration. It's not the infrastructure. It's just the application. Or my configuration, I can use that same config for all of my staging of my applications, and then just have to look at the, and then just assign it that way. But here's what's interesting about this. When you do this, you could templatize it all, right? So now I have templatization here. So now I templatize all of that. So now really all I have to do is pass variables or configuration variables during my deployments in each stage. And I can reuse all of these files across the board, right? Whether there's, I don't have to do this one big specialized template. I can do individualized templates for each of them. Maybe I have, as we said earlier, like AWS and GCP, maybe I have an infrastructure config for GCP. So if I decide this app now needs to run in GCP instead of AWS, the only thing I need to change is the variables that say run my, the template for GCP. Right? So this is a way to utilize Verified GitOps to really deploy out all of my my best practices here. Does that make sense? Anyone have questions about it? Okay. All right. So there's value initiatives, right? When your organization is trying to make this type of change, there's a number of different events that are occurring where you can implement this, right? So think about it like that. You could do it if you're, if you're creating, continuous delivery deployments, you want self-service for your developers. Well, this is where you would use a verified GitOps model to provide that, right? Or maybe you're doing modern continuous delivery. You want to replace the existing system. This is a great event or an opportunity to kind of start implementing these practices. Standardizing, templatizing, we just talked about, compliance, security, and governance. If you're a company that has PCI compliance issues or HIPAA compliance issues, or you have auditors who are coming in, imagine if you had a system where all of your configuration, all of your application code changes, all of your deployments are all audited and cataloged in one place. Your auditors come in, you give it to them in 2 minutes. They're like, oh, you give me everything I need. I don't have to spend 2 months auditing all of your deployments to make sure that that you're compliant. I have everything
after
here.
work.
Yeah, staying late, trying to pull it all together.
Right? I know that's a big problem, is that work-life balance. So trying to get that back as well.
Yeah. Again, the accelerate model, you want to reduce time to market. Every organization is looking to do this, to achieve this. So these are the different value initiatives that help you to kind of to identify when it's time to just try and implement something like this and like make that change. So let's see, and of course, continuous verification, right? Which is once you go into production, if it's broken, how do I revert it back? How many of you do rollbacks today? How do you do it? How long does it take? Hours, days, weeks, months? Minutes, hours? Minutes, hours is actually not terrible. That's not terrible. Minutes, hours is actually pretty
Yeah, I built it myself.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen discovery of a problem to a rollback of a problem take as long as 2 weeks in some big, very large organizations. Like just database concurrency alone has become a big challenge for some of them. But
we talked about the approval steps earlier,
Yeah,
right? And what happens is, and I'm sure some of you can attest to this in big organizations, is a lot of the software that developers write just sits on the shelf because the people who are over the production environment, well, they're like, hey, it's working now. Why would I add another variable into this for change management, right? So it's sort of that, developer versus SRE, kind of fight in there as well. And how do we kind of overcome that to make sure our application continues to get better?
Yeah, I remember that we had a really funny conversation where we took half the room. Let's say I'll even do the exercise here. All right, you guys are all DevOps engineers. You're the operations team. You're responsible for site reliability. It has to be up. All of your bonuses are based on up. If it's down, you're losing money. Okay. You guys, developers, your job is getting change, like changing code, providing value, new features. You need to provide those features to the customers in order for you to get your dollars, your bonus. Okay. Now here's how it works. If they have downtime because of an instability issue, they're going to lose their money. You guys need to get them to introduce instability into the environment. How successful are you going to be, right?
It doesn't work,
It doesn't work. It doesn't work, right? So
I'm going to send an email over there.
yeah, you're going to send your email over to careers, right? So this is the challenge, right? This is the true challenge of the operations versus developer mindset. We thought we were going to fix it with pizza teams. Doesn't quite work that way. The two pizza model is great at AWS because they built it from scratch, but in traditional organizations, that model just doesn't exist. You have to find ways to coalesce together. And Verified GitOps gives you the power to be able to provide, the developers can say, what do you need for me to prove that my code's stable? And the operations team can just say, these are the things I need. So now with Verified GitOps, you can build that into your workflows, validate it with your operations teams. And every time you commit code, it has to go through all that process to get to production, and it will. And if it doesn't pass any of it, it won't. And if it does get to production and break something, because you built Verified GitOps with a rollback model, it'll automatically revert back to the known working good environment, right? That's the dream. That's the dream. And that's actually what Verified GitOps is about, is getting you to be able to have that relationship and to have that verified flow, that Git flow that solves all of the tools problems, not just, SCM. Right? You want to have authorization, audit, all of those pieces have to be in your GitOps workflow. They don't exist today. That's what the Verified GitOps model is trying to solve. And that's where solutions like Harness, you need a solution that brings all that together. And a solution like Harness does that. That's kind of why we're talking about it. So I've given you a lot. I hope you actually learned something or had some, enjoyment out of this. Do you guys have any questions about this?
We are going to jump into a demo.
And we are going to do a demo.
We'll show you how this works.
I'll show you a little bit of a demo in Harness, but in the short term, any questions, and that'll help me to kind of focus on some of the things that you guys have concerns about.
So we do use the Bamboo Atlassian project. So how do you guys compare Harness with Bamboo?
Okay, so Bamboo is a continuous integration solution. Right, so you do all your build and create an artifact. What?
Let me tackle this one.
You want to do it?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So within, you're really good, right? Companies are really great at taking code from code to artifact, right? You have kind of two lanes there. You have an actual CI tool set, such as Jenkins, Bamboo, Circle CI, whatever you choose to use. Second, being a code repository or a Git repository, right? JFrog, whatever you want to use, right? Doesn't matter. But what we're trying to do is everything beyond that. So what happens when you actually deploy those artifacts into production, where you have to go through several checks? Those checks being, well, first off, you have to have a cloud stack or a Terraform or something to actually provision the environment. We have to actually check to make sure that deployment's going to work, right? So we got to verify it. And then at the end, if something goes wrong, we have to have the automated, have some way to roll back or roll forward to fix that patch, right? Now, Bamboo is great. It's awesome at what it does. Circle CI is great. It does what it does. They're all great. But beyond actually bringing that piece of code into the artifact, it's all scripts, right? So that's what's happening is we're actually scripting together all of this automation. If we have to add a new service, it's scripts. If we have to pull in a new APM tool, it's scripts. And what's happening is every time that updates, we're fixing those scripts or we're performing all these tasks manually. And so there was no, Jody and them didn't see a way, and they got the most phone calls actually about, how do I bring this automated all the way through production, right? Again, Bamboo, great CI tool, but anything beyond CI and bringing that into production is going to require some manual tasks, right? We're trying to automate everything beyond actually making that into an artifact. And so we'll show you a little bit of how this works here.
Yeah, I didn't quite I didn't put these slides into this deck because it didn't quite fit, but this kind of to help you answer this question. So when you think about your CI pipeline, there's a lot going on there, right? But you have, you're building tests, you have, whatever you're using, Bamboo, Jenkins, or otherwise. And you're building these artifacts, you have artifact repositories, but Artifactory or Nexus, et cetera. And once you have that artifact, right, continuous integration kind of ends. And now you extend all those tools, right? You plugins or otherwise. You can script, you can write really long Jenkins files to do deployments. I mean, lots of companies are doing that painfully. But
recently, talked to somebody today, had a 2,500 line script to put an application into production. So, and every time they updated it, it broke half of that script. So they had to help, 3 or 4 guys had to huddle around a table and fix that script just to push it into production. So, yeah.
So then you kind of look at this and you go, okay, well, I have this the CD pipeline. It looks pretty basic, right? It doesn't have all that fun stuff on the other side, but I don't know how many of you guys know about the GNOME underpants, right? You guys big fans of GNOME underpants? It's like, hey, I got phase 1, and then phase 3, we have profit. We're done, deploy, and there's so much more to this. I mean, if you really look at it, it looks like this, right? This is what delivery looks like. Right, you have that artifact, and now you have to, do cloud. You have to deploy your infrastructure. You have to provision it through Terraform or CloudFormation. You have to do your change management. All your approval steps. You have a release strategy if you want to do Canary. How many of you guys do Canary today? Okay, whoa. That's actually quite a lot. A lot of people. I can't tell you how many times I ask that question and just hands just stay down. So Canary's challenging. Would you guys admit Canary's challenging to implement? Yeah. Are you doing it in Kubernetes, or are you doing it in any other format?
Yeah, he's got the stickers.
He's doing it.
He's like, hell yeah,
he's doing it. Hell yeah,
years, man.
For years, right? So yeah, I mean, blue-green tends to be more popular today, but that requires duplicate infrastructure and a lot of very expensive stuff running to just try and do blue-green. But these are all the different steps. And then, how many of you guys use APM or any kind of monitoring tools besides Prometheus? Or you could be using Prometheus, okay. And so all of these tools, logging, et cetera, all the way to, when you want to do a rollback, that all requires scripts. Scripts. You have to write all of that today, right? If you want to make all of that work, especially if you're using something like a Bamboo or a Jenkins or whatever, you want to extend it, you have to extend it with scripts. You can use a workflow engine. You could use a script runner like Ansible or Chef or Puppet if you want, and just keep running scripts and testing against those scripts. But you have to write that. And if anything changes, you have to rewrite that, right? Is that how one variable changes, one configuration changes, you have to go back and fix everything and make sure and validate it all works. It's kind of a big challenge. So these are all the things that we're ultimately trying to solve here, which is, not only the workflow, but also the reporting structure. The reporting is really important. How do you get your reporting today out of your system, right? How do you measure things, and how do you get that data out and be able to provide it to auditors or to CEOs?
More granular, right? I mean, today, how do we verify which development teams are performing well, right? As a manager, how do you understand which teams are doing well? I mean, obviously, we can do traditional methods, right? Through how many, commits this team had, or how many failures this team had, but overall, how do you determine that, and how do you tie that to MBOs? How are you possibly supposed to do that with something without quantitative data, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what this gives you. So
lines of code written. That's why we're writing 2,000 lines. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, lines of code.
Exactly. What that does is it slows down.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we were in the journey of having a Jenkins doing continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. So I think our strategy has been changing to use continuous delivery more on the Spinnaker side.
Okay.
So how does you compare with Spinnaker?
You want to jump in?
So Spinnaker's a great tool, right? Bit by Netflix.
I've not been using it like the other.
Open source,
yeah,
made by
open source
Netflix.
tool made by Netflix, released publicly, 5-7 years ago. But what we're seeing is there's still some of these problems exist, right? So first and foremost, you have to have a team to manage that, right? You have to pay 2 DevOps engineers, 3 DevOps engineers in some cases, just to manage the Spinnaker stand-up. And second to that, if you're going to install Spinnaker, how many of you are Spinnaker professionals? You? Spinnaker Pro? A little bit? No? All right. Spinnaker professionals, right? Not many people. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to go hire somebody like Armory. We're going to have to go hire a consultant to do that. So not only did I have to hire 3 DevOps engineers, I had to go hire a consultant, right? And now I'm already $1 million in the hole because I've hired 3 DevOps engineers at $120K a piece. We'll round that up to 200,000 with the insurance and all that kind of stuff in there. So to the company, it's about 600K. We'll pay 400 to a company like Armory to do that. So we're at $1 million investment. We haven't even got Spinnaker stood up yet. We just have people in place to do so, right? So now I've got to go spend the time to get Spinnaker stood up. And then when Spinnaker's finally stood up, well, what happens, right? Who's making changes to Spinnaker? If you need something else, you need to add Helm, you need to do something else. Well, how are we going to do that, right? We're going to put more headcount on it. We're going to maybe, hire Armory again to do that. So now we're spending more dollars on that. Not only that, there's some drawbacks with it as well. So what updates are happening to the tool, right? Well, we can, provide our own version of Spinnaker. But what Harness does out of the box is, provides you not only the safety, right, of being able to have a roadmap and a product roadmap, be able to do that, but to do it out of the box, right? So instead of, we install a delegate on your machine, we'll have the first app up in like an hour and a half, it's that quick to get it off the ground. And so really when we start evaluating things with like Spinnaker and stuff like that, I love going up against Spinnaker. I love going up against these companies. I'll lose one out of 10. And that's fine. But, companies really see the value in understanding, hey, I don't have to do all of this. Let's just give it to Harness because Harness, we're tool agnostic. So we don't care what you use. We also, we'd love you to stay, but if you leave, great, we'll give it to you. We'll package everything you get up within Harness, hand it to you to hopefully go in your next CD process and go forward, right? If you need to get out of Spinnaker, well, we're kind of losing all that data, right? If you go anywhere else outside of that open tool, we're kind of done there. So again, Spinnaker's great. I think I do think there's definitely a market for tools like Spinnaker right now. But if we're trying to get CD stood up today, we're trying to solve problems today, it's just not really a cost-effective measure. And it's also not going to save you really much time doing that as well. And that's really, and I'm not even doing a feature comparison. That's just really, on the outside looking into Harness.
Right. So the Spinnaker model is fine. You could do it that way, but again, there's a lot of pieces missing out of Spinnaker. That's kind of the idea. They don't have templatization, for instance. That's one of the big parts of Verified GitOps, right? You want to templatize everything so you can reuse it all, and Spinnaker doesn't provide that built in. So that's an example of that, right? So let's, any other questions on, can I go for it?
One question, maybe you can address it later, but the premise you raised earlier, like switching from AWS to GCP or whatever it might be, I don't know, I kind of have a problem with that. Like that sounds great in theory, but in reality, if you take a single dependency on a cloud provider dependency, like let's say it's DynamoDB, something that doesn't actually
Once you go serverless, it gets a little more challenging.
or whatever, whatever the thing is that's cloud provider, I hear what you're saying, but like the practicality of flipping that switch.
Fair enough. So I'll give you a real life example because actually we did this. Harness did this. We weren't using cloud specific database or cloud specific serverless technologies. But what we needed to do is we picked up from AWS, moved to GCP. We did it in, I think it was like 26 minutes or something like that. Some like ridiculously short amount of time. And basically all we did was we just changed our infrastructure provisioner and moved everything over there, moved our entire platform over. So we're now running on GCP and we did it with no downtime. So in order to do that, right, itself is, I agree with you. Like once you start embedding yourself into the ecosystem of a particular cloud provider, yeah, okay, DynamoDB, now you can't do it, right? But if you're not in that position, or if you want to move just the application component, maybe you need to be multi-cloud, and you need to have some flexibility in that. Maybe your databases are in a VPC, but they're in your data center. And so as long as you have connectivity back to your mainframe in your data center or your back-end systems, that can technically work. That's kind of granted, I do accept your challenge.
It's a great story, don't get me wrong.
It's
a great story.
It's the dream, right? And Kubernetes, right? If I'm using EKS versus AKS versus GCP or GKE, right? They're slightly different, even though they're all supposed to be exactly the same.
But we have several customers who've done that as well.
Yeah.
I think I don't want to. Nutanix, I think, was one of them. They did their cloud migration in 46 minutes. So we have several examples of doing migrations in a really short amount of time, and we'd be more than happy to send you some information.
I don't have to take too much time.
No, it's fine.
If in your demo you showed something that gave me a compelling reason to understand why you can do that better than other tools, that might be interesting.
I can kind of do that actually. So let's do that. Let's jump into the demo and see what we come up with here. Okay. So now.
Is Harness available as a SaaS offering?
It is SaaS and on-prem.
It is SaaS and/or
Harness
does use Harness to deploy. In fact, last month we deployed over 3,000 times in production.
Let's see.
That's a good question. We drink our own champagne. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm gonna just move this over, and there it is. Oh wait, which way is it? There it is. Get over there. Hey, that's not what I want to see. Where's the other screen?
Yeah, I got it. Much extra.
Wow, now it's crazy. All right, hold on. That's actually not what I want.
It's right there. I see it.
There it is.
Yeah.
Somehow it's separated. There we go. All right. You know what I should have done is actually I should just mirror the screens. Let me do that. Let's just take a second.
You open our tab. That's fine.
I'm trying to just mirror my displays, and that'll make things a lot easier.
I think it's arrangement.
Yep. It's just hard to see on that screen because of the weird view. There we go. All right.
Awesome.
Let's cancel this, and off we go. Okay. Gather windows, close.
We did.
It's not closing. All right. You'd think I would be a tech person here, right? I could figure some of this out. But I have you fooled. Can't close that, but I can open this. Here we go. Finally. Wait. Finally.
There we go.
Thanks for your patience, folks. All right. Welcome to Harness. So let's talk a little about what Harness is providing here. So right off the bat, there's a lot of failures here. There's a reason for that, actually. So part of the reason for that is because we deploy tons in this environment, this demo environment, lots of failures on purpose. So every deployment is shown, right? So we can see all of the deployments that have occurred. Because it's a auditable system, none of these deployments ever go away. Like you can audit any of these in perpetuity. So that's the idea, is that deployments have to, every deployment has to be reconcilable and auditable. And so one of the things that happens here from a view standpoint is I should be able to look at a particular deployment and understand exactly what happened. So for this particular deployment, I have a number of pre-deployment steps, right, that occurred. The deployment itself had a rollout. I should be able to see everything on the right here is basically everything on the right here for like all the log data or all the console data, be able to kind of analyze and see anything that's going on, any step along the way and during any of my deployment piece steps. And when it's verified, in this case, it moved into stage 2. So now I have my next stage, maybe my staging environment, and of course being able to follow all of those across through my integration tests, my regression tests, etc., and be able to manage, be able to see all of my workflows. And this is all step by step. So this was actually an existing pipeline that we have. And this last piece is an approval step. This approval step went and kind of checked into Jira and of course identified, somebody received this, in this case, Rishi, our CTO, who probably did not actually respond to this one. But this step was approved. And when it was approved, of course, we drop back here, then it moved on to the next stage where it actually, where did it go? Where it actually, jumping in here, went on to stage 4 where it failed. So the failure here, I have all the details of the failure. So let's take a look at the failure here, understand what happened. It actually failed when it was validated against a number of different APM tools and log tools. And it's pretty neat because, for instance, it identified that there was an anomaly in the code base here. So these diverged from normal to terrible. And in that diversion, it identified that this is a risk and should fail. So from a metric standpoint, and in addition, for the logs, we also were able to identify anomalous events in the logs automatically, and identify that those were, things that actually should cause this failure as well. So you can actually, and this is a nice part about it because there's an ML, a little bit of AI and a lot of ML to understand what's going on in this environment, and you can actually help teach it. So you can actually say, oh, for this particular problem, during this event, I want it to identify that this is, not a problem, something that's a lower risk, and I shouldn't be as concerned about this, right? So you can actually address these as well. So this, and everything is again logged into your change management and your content system. In this case, all in Jira, so it's all posted to Jira as well. So this is kind of what you would see in a deployment model. How you set this up is actually kind of to answer your question about like what differentiates. So for each app, so let's choose retail. So in this application, each application is an abstract, right? So I have an application which is a collection of my services that need to be deployed, and in that we break it up by the services themselves, right? So a Tomcat instance, and other components here, right? So different instances of this, but also the environments that it's deploying to. And in the environments themselves, I can abstract again. So for the environments, I can say for this workflow, my environments are, I'll just choose like Azure here. I could choose that it's going to be in Azure, and I can have an infrastructure definition that really defines that this is going to be Microsoft Azure. I'm going to do Kubernetes deploy. The cloud provider is going to be, these are defined as, within the environment here. I don't have a subscription for that, but basically this allows you to define the infrastructure for this, and it abstracts it away. So I don't have to think about the different components of my permissions and all that, because that's built into the integration for Azure itself. And you do that through kind of the different cloud providers you provision ahead of time. You create the connectors for those. You'll create your application stacks themselves. And what this does is this allows us the ability to abstract out our artifact servers. So for each application workflow, I can determine which artifact servers. If I want to change it, I just change once in my workflow, and then that fixes it for all of the applications that are using that workflow. Right? I can templatize all of this, so I can then take all of these and create templates out of them so they can be reused. And let's see if I can show an example of that. In my template library, for instance, I can say, I want to have a health check. I can templatize my health check as a get for this. We can look a little deeper into this. And you'll notice the URL here is, of course, a variable. So this gets filled in from the workflow itself, right? So you have the ability to templatize every aspect of this. And during a workflow, for each of those workflows that we were looking at before, and if we go back into, for instance, here, let's go actually into the application retail. Into the retail application itself, and we look at one of the workflows here. Let's see if I have, I think pipeline 2, right? Okay, so within the actual workflows themselves, you have all the steps, the pre-deployment and post-deployment steps, as well as the deployment steps themselves. You have all the rollback steps you can employ. So how do I want to roll back? Do I want it to be, do I want it to be based on a failure? Do I want to, do a log analysis? Do I want to notify a particular team via email? Do I want to update my CI system? So you can call the different components. You can templatize how you're going to do them. For the rollback, here's a rollback deployment step. I don't think it's not giving me the permissions in here. Here, next. I can say do it in 10 minutes, right? How long I want it to wait for the rollback step. And the rollback is actually great because with Harness, because we're doing the entire workflow to deployment for every artifact all the way through every step, we know exactly what needs to be rolled all the way back. So you don't have to build the rollback or write a script to do it. It'll automatically do the rollback step if that's what you're telling it to do. So these are all kind of templatized into the system already. So it's somewhat plug and play. And you can be up and running in a pipeline in, I think what is our, like if we were to,
I think we tell people 3 to 4 hours,
Yeah.
but we're definitely like an under promise, over deliver type. I think
Yeah.
the majority of them are installed once the delegate is installed, which is also the hardest part is getting that delegate installed on the client's machine. After that, it's honestly, it's like an hour, if that, hour and a half on most cases.
So does that help you with understanding the infrastructure provisioning model, like how we can help a little bit, or no? You're nodding. Okay.
When you say you can get that up and running in an hour's time frame, what's the assumption there of what the starting state is? What does the customer already have? What do they already have set up?
We're assuming that you have some sort of CI tool in place. We're assuming that you have some artifact repository in place, and then we're assuming, I'm sure you saw that messy slide with all of those columns. We're also assuming that that's also the case as well. So, we definitely have slid into some of the grimiest, most, areas and fix that fairly quickly. You can go read, we have hundreds of customer stories on our website of CTOs or director level people speaking on how much time and development time this has saved throughout the process.
Some of the other things that I think I do want to touch on though are, for instance, like dashboards. We talked about the accelerate dashboard, right? Or the accelerate numbers, change failure rate, lead time, MTTR, and deployment frequency. These are measurements that are very easily achievable inside of a platform that sees what every deployment is, right? So if Harness is doing all your deployments for all of your teams across, you can see which teams are doing better or worse, measure them based on that. How long does it take code from commit to get to production? How often are each of the teams getting, their applications into a deployment state, to an artifact where it can be deployed, right? What is if there's a failure, how long does it take to recover? These are all measurable inside of the
honestly,
platform.
For a good developer, stuff like this is their best friend, right? It's somebody who can accomplish, something that would take somebody else 100 lines of code. You get it done in 10 or whatever it be, and yours is good qualified code. When it's plugged in, it's going to show, right? At the end of the day, you don't have to worry about any colleagues who, maybe inflating their story numbers or whatever it have be. I mean, this is raw data. This is something that is very quantitative and measurable, right? Instead of it being a very qualitative, maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't type situation. You can point fingers is what I'm trying to say, you know?
Yep.
If he did a bad deployment, we can just say he did it, you know? It was his fault.
Well, and that's actually the audit trail here. Go ahead, I'm sorry, you had a question?
So building workflows and pipelines, is that totally hands-off just the, wizard or designer-driven UI?
So you can do UI.
Yep.
Everything is configurable to YAML as well. So if you prefer to do a
Yeah,
specific
so-
code, we absolutely let you do that as well. No problem.
You can act, and this is, remember, this is GitOps talk, so you can actually do it as GitOps. Here, let me show you an example of something here that you'll get a kick out of. So I have my little app here, and all of this is in code, right? So I have all of for my PH app here, I have all of my YAML files are here, but they're also in my Git repo. So if I go to my Git repo here, so I have my harness app here. It's my app, right? PH app. And just to kind of prove that this is the case, let's go over and take a look here. So if I look at this template here, so we're in PH app, and I have harness app API version 1. Let's try and find something. Here's my index. Let's try and find something where I can edit here.
And by the way, in marketing, we would call this a bidirectional sync.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not
So-
sure what techies call it.
So yeah, bidirectional Git sync. So
Yeah.
so I have my library Nginx YAML here. So let's just go find that over here. My app environment. I think this is my index YAML. Nope. What did I say it was? It's in my artifact server library. Okay, so if I go into my PH app, my environments, nope, infrastructure definitions. Sorry guys, it's just kind of a fun one I was playing around with. Here we go, artifact. So if I look at my index YAML here, let's just update something. Let's say I want to edit this file, and I'm going to say it's not Nginx, so I'm going to use Nginx latest. Okay, I'm just going to update it here. I'm going to give one of my famous commits because. And so now this Nginx latest is here on my GitHub. And if we go over to the other side here, and I were to kind of refresh this, yeah, there you go. So it immediately updates it. So you can do a git sync and bidirectional. So if I say, oh, you know what, actually, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to get rid of that latest. Let's get rid of the latest. Save it. If I go back over to my here and I refresh this, so it's bidirectional. It's very fast. So this is truly, configuration as code. We're just abstracting it all so that you can do it all in the UI if you need to build it. But ultimately, once it's built, you can follow GitOps workflows. You can edit and be GitOps, right? You can do it as GitOps and make changes to the individual configurations and files and app changes and whatever inside of Git.
So for that bi-directional, I mean, how would it work if the repository is restricted?
Well, I'm assuming this is your repository, right? So in this case, I'm making an assumption that you have the permissions to do it. In many cases, what happens is, as a developer, right, you have access to the repository components that you have access to, right? And what's great about this is everything's already been templatized or built out for you, and the changes you're making are only the changes you're allowed to make. And those get applied. And those also trigger, right? So I'm making changes, those triggers will then kick off the workflow itself, right? If I make a change to my application code and commit it to say, or I do a pull, then you can configure it to say, if I do a pull request, I want you to use that as a trigger to kick off my pipeline and run my pipeline. Because technically you should be constantly committing your code to the main, in the GitOps world, committing your code to the main branch, right? To your master branch at all times.
Kind of going back to the original question around the, I was kind of turned off by GUI-driven work
Right.
as a developer.
Yeah, that's a lot of art.
So my question, I guess, is if I want to start in the code editor, so So I got VS Code up or whatever it is. Is there a story there where I could go from 0 to 1 as a developer with no assistant from the UI?
Well, you would have to configure in the webhooks back and forth, right? So SSH, back and forth. I don't know if we have the API configured yet to allow the right API to actually allow you to. You can create the workflows without the GUI using the API, but I don't know if you can create the webhooks without it.
I guess my question is really like what I kind of like, especially in the, I live in Bash and do a lot of things in Kubernetes. So I want to have a CLI. Like I can go over there and say harness event, and it goes and builds out and scaffolds out based on template. Maybe I pass in a template as kind of a YAML style generator, and it gives me something like this based on a standard, and it gives me a starting place. But because I'm a developer, I write code. Editing YAMLs is pretty second nature to me. I can go in there into the YAML and go tweak the things I want, much like I would with a package JSON in a Node.js app or something like that. And really, I don't want to ever go to a GUI until maybe I want to look at reports, or maybe I want to go look at how we do approvals, or maybe there's some secondary things. But I want all the way up to the point where at least the CI gets closer to CD. Maybe I don't want to ever see a GUI.
Yeah,
and you can. So the idea would be that the initial setup of harness, right, of the workflows or the pipelines or whatever, would be established during the initial engagement, right? But then everything's templatized. At that point, if you want to use Git and command line to do it all, sure. Now, is there a harness in it to do it? No, not today. It's a great feature add. I can definitely throw that into the mix. But yeah, essentially once you have the hooks in place, you could use command line and Git to do all that work.
In fact, I think we have entire teams on the back end I know 3 customers for sure who have entire teams who do this, and they don't have access to the GUI.
Right.
They only have access to the YAML portion. And so I think that was to protect like the reporting aspect, because they had some we'll skip that story, but they had only had access to the YAML. So I mean, we can limit that access. We can control all of that. People really do exactly what you're saying. Do not want to touch the UI, and we're developer first, so we definitely built that in there.
Yeah, and I know there's a roadmap already for CLI. I just don't know exactly what the extent of it is. And in our kind of approach here, the goal here is to abstract away all of this that we're talking about from the developer. So the developer, all they have to do is develop code. I mean, that's the dream. As a developer, I just want to write code. I want to commit my code. I want to see the results of my feature. If it actually passed all the tests, and if it didn't, get feedback as quickly as I can so that I can address that. Or I want to see it get all the way to production as quickly as possible, because I'm writing code and I don't want to wait 6 months for that feature to get to a production state. I want it to be in and available to my customer as soon as possible. And if that can be minutes, hours, or days, that's a heck of a lot better than weeks, months, or years. Or never, right? So yes, the answer is you can do this in Git. If somebody else set it all up for you ahead of time, then you can just live in Git and you'll never have to worry about it ever again. Or live at command line and your commits in Visual Studio Code. You're off and go.
So I think we shared quite a bit today. We've kind of discussed quite a lot. I think before we kind of break out, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But before we do so, is there any other lagging questions that had either over the deck itself, the DevOps culture process, or the harness tool application?
So does that support the deployment targets, which are kind of pretty legacy, like WebLogic and all those?
Yeah, so it's technology agnostic in that regard, because we're taking an artifact. I don't care if it's a container or a WAR file or a package, or I'm taking that artifact and I'm moving it to the state where it's providing value in production, right? That's my goal, is to provide the workflow and all of the governance and all of the pieces across this, step by step, that have been agreed upon by the operations team to allow the developers to get their code to production, right? Like in the security team and all those pieces. I want to make sure that I'm taking whatever that artifact is and moving it to wherever it is. So if it's a WebLogic WAR file, if it's a jar file, if it's a tar file, if it's a package, if it's a zip file, if it's whatever it needs to be.
Deploying it through WebLogic itself. So let's say I committed a code change and I would like to actually see it deployed to their WebLogic.
Okay.
Run some smoke test. If it passed, move that down to QA WebLogic. And
Right.
then go on and just put it into
Yeah, so the
total legacy. Is that
right, yeah, yes, exactly. So the infrastructure provider, the cloud, what we call the cloud provider, would be your WebLogic server, right? The artifact would be your WAR file that you're moving from, that would be tested. So it would be moved. Your testing tools would be whatever the testing tool. Maybe you're using JMeter for performance tests. Maybe you're using Selenium for front end testing. Whatever you're using, all of that is built. Is kind of designed into the workflows. So whether you're using a cloud deployment, maybe it's a Lambda file to AWS, maybe it's a WAR file to a WebLogic server, or maybe it's basically any object, it could be Docker to Docker container to a Kubernetes cluster. So we can cover all of those. And to kind of wrap up the story about the verified GitOps, GitOps is only Kubernetes, right? If you're thinking in GitOps native, tooling is Kubernetes. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I mean, I think we do GitOps with, we do like GitOps with this, it's cloud, definitely. I don't know if Kubernetes, I mean, it's not necessarily used cloud, but I don't know. We've done a lot without Kubernetes that we consider GitOps.
So, but how much of that did you have to write in script
It's
to
a
do?
whole lot better.
Yeah, the experience is a whole lot better in Kube.
You have a lot
Right.
more tools that you're exposed to, and the whole control panel Kubernetes that you lack with platform. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the native tool set for GitOps is Kube. Like it's kind of designed, the GitOps workflows are really designed around Kubernetes. But with something like Harness or the verified GitOps story, the goal is you should be able to do anything, whether it be WAR files in existing legacy application servers or Docker containers running in Swarm or whatever, right? You should be able to do that without having to rewrite everything to make that happen. You just have to determine, define what that endpoint is and take that artifact and move it to that endpoint. And that's what we're trying to solve and what we built all of the governance, all of the security around, et cetera. So that's kind of the harness side of that. But verified GitOps story is really about you should be able to do all of that. If you're using GitOps, if you're using verified GitOps, you should have the capability of doing all of that from artifact to production, all the testing, all the governance, all the security, all the approvals, all the change management, et cetera. All right. We took a lot of time today. I really appreciate your patience and the questions. They were great. And I will make sure to follow up on some of those, actually. Those are good ones.
Yep. Yeah, and we appreciate y'all's time. If y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out to us after. We'll stick around till everybody's gone. But we appreciate Mike.
Mike, thanks so much.
Big guy for us. Thanks for having us on. And then also Peter, on a moment's notice, flying down from Boston. So saving the day. So, big shouts out to Peter for learning this. And we really appreciate his work. And we appreciate all you guys as well. We look forward to coming to some more time here, Mike. And so we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for
Great.
coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, improving. Thank you very much for improving.
For doing that as well. Yeah,
this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
The platform's so good.